Airport manager tries to remove veteran with PTSD service dog from VIP lounge. Dog later prevents manager's heart attack. Victoria Hargrove surveyed the immaculate expanse of the Platinum Executive Lounge with the critical eye she had developed over 15 years of luxury hospitality management. At 48, she had cultivated an impressive career trajectory from front desk associate to her current position as senior hospitality manager at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport's most exclusive terminal. Her tailored charcoal suit, pearl earrings, and meticulously maintained blonde bob completed the image of polished professionalism that had become her personal brand. The Platinum Lounge represented the crown jewel of Victoria's professional domain, a sanctuary of understated luxury reserved for the airline's highest-tier frequent flyers and premium international travelers. She took genuine pride in maintaining its reputation for impeccable service, refined atmosphere, and flawless attention to detail. Under her management, the lounge had received industry recognition for 3 consecutive years, achievements she referenced prominently in her annual performance reviews. Today, like most days, Victoria conducted her morning inspection with characteristic thoroughness, noting a slightly misaligned magazine display, requesting adjustment to the ambient lighting in the east section, and ensuring the breakfast selection met her exacting standards. Her staff had learned to anticipate her expectations, moving with practiced efficiency to address any imperfections before they registered as formal corrections. The lounge was operating at approximately 60% capacity, a typical mid-morning occupancy that allowed for the perfect balance of active service and peaceful exclusivity. Victoria's trained eye categorized the current guests with automatic assessment. Corporate executives working quietly on laptops, affluent leisure travelers enjoying premium refreshments, and the occasional off-duty pilot or senior flight attendant utilizing staff privileges. All presented the expected appearance and behavior of Platinum Lounge clientele. Across the terminal, Major James Mac McAllister adjusted the harness on his service dog, a German shepherd named Valor. At 35, Mac's physical bearings still reflected his military background, tall, with excellent posture despite the noticeable stiffness in his left leg. 3 tours in Afghanistan had left visible and invisible marks, the latter far more challenging than the former. His civilian clothing, dark jeans, a button-down shirt, and a leather jacket was neat but functional, selected for comfort during the long flight ahead rather than status signaling. Valor had been Mac's constant companion for the past 2 years, a partnership that had transformed his ability to navigate civilian life after medical retirement from the Army Rangers. The German Shepherd was specifically trained to mitigate Mac's combat-related PTSD, creating physical space in crowded environments, performing deep pressure therapy during anxiety episodes, and perhaps most importantly, alerting to rising stress levels before they triggered full panic responses. With Valor's assistance, Mac had gradually rebuilt his life, recently completing a master's degree in engineering and securing a position with a defense contractor that valued his military background and technical expertise. Today's flight to Washington, D.C. represented an important professional milestone, his first solo presentation to senior military officials regarding infrastructure security systems his company had developed. The trip involved navigating multiple potential triggers, crowds, security checkpoints, enclosed spaces, but also demonstrated how far he had come in recovery. His new Platinum frequent flyer status, earned through numerous site visits over the past year, entitled him to lounge access that would provide a crucial quiet space to review his presentation and manage his energy before the flight. As Mac approached the Platinum Lounge entrance with Valor walking perfectly at heel, neither he nor Victoria yet realized how significantly their paths would cross, nor how their initial interaction would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge assumptions and potentially save a life. Mac presented his boarding pass and platinum membership card to the lounge receptionist, Valor sitting calmly beside him in the perfect service position, his specialized vest clearly identifying him as a service animal. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, verified his credentials with practiced efficiency. "Welcome to the Platinum Lounge, Major McAllister," she said, using his military title visible on his membership profile. "Your flight to Washington departs from Gate C-14 in approximately 2 hours. Please enjoy our complimentary breakfast service and premium amenities during your wait." As Sarah completed the check-in process, she added with professional courtesy, "Your service animal is welcome, of course. We have a designated quiet area to the left that many of our guests with service dogs find particularly comfortable." "Thank you," Mac replied, appreciating both the explicit accommodation and the matter-of-fact manner in which it was offered. He had encountered everything from excessive questioning to outright resistance regarding Valor's access, making straightforward acceptance a welcome change. Mac and Valor made their way into the lounge, moving toward the suggested quiet area where he could review his presentation notes with minimal distraction. The space was elegantly appointed with comfortable seating, subdued lighting, and excellent noise isolation from the main lounge, precisely the environment Mac needed before navigating the sensory challenges of air travel. He settled into a corner armchair that allowed him to position Valor beside him while maintaining a clear view of both exits, a seating preference developed during therapy to help manage hypervigilance, while still providing genuine security. From a leather portfolio, Mac retrieved his presentation materials and began his final review, Valor resting attentively at his feet. The inciting incident unfolded approximately 20 minutes later when Victoria Hargrove, conducting her mid-morning circuit of the lounge, noticed the German shepherd in the quiet section. She paused mid-stride, her expression shifting from general managerial assessment to focused concern. While she had been briefed about occasional service animals in the lounge, the dog's size and presence in the premium space immediately registered as potentially problematic in her carefully maintained environment. Victoria approached the reception desk, where Sarah was assisting another guest. Waiting until the interaction concluded, she asked in a low, controlled voice, "When did we admit a dog to the lounge? Was proper documentation verified?" Sarah looked momentarily confused. "That's Major McAllister's service animal. He's a platinum member, and the dog is properly vested and clearly trained. He's been perfectly quiet in the reading area." Victoria's expression remained professionally pleasant despite her internal reservations. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll just confirm our accommodation protocols are being properly implemented." This response, superficially about procedural compliance, but actually reflecting personal discomfort with the animal's presence, set the stage for the conflict to follow. Victoria moved purposefully toward the quiet area, her mind already formulating the appropriate language to assess the situation without appearing immediately unwelcoming. Her concern wasn't primarily about legitimate accommodation, but about how other premium guests might perceive an animal in their exclusive space. As Victoria approached, Mac looked up from his materials, immediately registering her purposeful advance and managerial demeanor. Years of navigating similar situations had given him an almost instinctive recognition of impending access challenges. "Good morning," Victoria began, her voice calibrated to professional courtesy while conveying subtle authority. "I'm Victoria Hargrove, Senior Hospitality Manager. I notice you have an animal companion with you today." The phrasing "animal companion" rather than "service dog" immediately signaled to Mac that this was not merely a friendly check-in. Valor, sensing the subtle tension in Mac's body language, shifted to a more alert position while remaining perfectly behaved. "This is Valor, my service dog," Mac responded evenly. He's trained to mitigate a medical disability and has public access rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Victoria maintained her professional smile while subtly scanning the dog and handler. The animal appeared well-groomed and professionally vested, but her concerns remained. "Of course, we fully comply with all accessibility requirements. May I ask what specific tasks your animal performs? We need to ensure appropriate accommodation for all our premium guests." The question, technically legal, but bordering on inappropriate given Valor's obvious professional presentation, reflected Victoria's underlying skepticism about the legitimacy of the accommodation need. Though she would never consciously acknowledge it, her assessment was influenced by Mac's apparently healthy physical appearance, which didn't align with her mental image of disability requiring animal assistance. "He's trained as a PTSD service dog," Mac explained, his tone remaining even despite the familiar tension of having to justify his legitimate accommodation. "He performs specific tasks related to anxiety management, spatial buffering, and stress response interruption." The directness of this answer, naming his psychiatric condition rather than offering vague explanations, reflected Mac's deliberate choice to normalize invisible disabilities rather than conceal them. Yet Victoria's subtle shift in expression revealed the common stigma still attached to mental health accommodations compared to more visibly obvious physical disabilities. "I see," she responded, her tone suggesting incomplete acceptance. "While we certainly respect medical needs, we also must consider the comfort of all our premium guests. Some may have allergies or cultural aversions to dogs in close quarters. Perhaps I could arrange an alternate waiting area that might be more appropriate for your specific situation." This suggestion, framed as helpful accommodation, but actually proposing separation and implicit downgrade, crystallized the conflict between them. Victoria was technically offering an alternative while effectively challenging the legitimacy of Mac's presence in the premium space with his service animal. The underlying message was clear. The dog's presence was being treated as potentially disruptive rather than as legitimate medical equipment. Mac recognized the familiar pattern of minimization disguised as accommodation, a challenge that those with invisible disabilities frequently navigated. His response would determine whether this interaction escalated into confrontation or found resolution through education and assertion of legitimate rights. "I appreciate your concern," he replied, maintaining calm professionalism despite the familiar frustration building within him. "However, Valor is a highly trained service animal with public access rights specifically protected under federal law. He'll remain completely unobtrusive, and I prefer to utilize the lounge benefits my platinum status provides, just as any other qualifying passenger would expect." This response, firm but not aggressive, educational rather than confrontational, established the essential conflict that would define their initial relationship. The veteran with an invisible disability asserting his legitimate rights versus the manager attempting to maintain her concept of premium experience, even at the expense of proper accommodation. How each responded to this tension would set the stage for everything that followed. Victoria maintained her professional composure, though Mac could detect the subtle tightening around her eyes that suggested his response hadn't satisfied her concerns. After a momentary pause, she offered what appeared to be a compromise but actually represented continued resistance. "Of course, Major McAllister, we respect all applicable regulations. Perhaps we could relocate you to our private conference suite? It will provide more space for your medical equipment while ensuring other guests' comfort." The subtle hesitation before medical equipment The legally correct designation for service animals revealed Victoria's continued skepticism about the legitimacy of Mac's needs. Though phrased as an upgrade, the suggestion clearly aimed to separate him from the main lounge areas, treating his accommodation as a problem to be managed rather than a right to be respected. Before Mac could respond, a distinguished older gentleman seated nearby lowered his newspaper and interjected unexpectedly. "Excuse me," he said, his tone pleasant but authoritative. "I couldn't help overhearing your conversation. As someone who's been a Platinum member for 27 years, I should note that this service dog is far less disruptive than many human guests I've encountered in this lounge." He offered a friendly nod to Mac before returning to his reading, his brief comment creating momentary disruption in Victoria's carefully controlled narrative. The unexpected intervention created an awkward pause, shifting the dynamic from private confrontation to public observation. Victoria was acutely aware that managing premium client relationships required avoiding situations where valued members might perceive inequality or poor service. The senior member's comment had effectively transformed Mac from potential disruption to legitimate peer in the exclusive space. Of course, Victoria recovered smoothly. Major McAllister is welcome to use any lounge facilities his status entitles him to. I was merely offering additional options. With a professional nod that did little to mask her discomfort, she added, "Please let our staff know if you require anything specific for your comfort." As Victoria turned to leave, maintaining the appearance of routine client interaction despite the internal dissonance, Valor's behavior suddenly changed. The German Shepherd, previously in perfect downstay position, raised his head alertly, nostrils flaring slightly as he processed information imperceptible to human senses. His attention focused intently on Victoria, tracking her movements with unusual concentration. Mac immediately noticed this behavior shift, the subtle but unmistakable indication that Valor had detected something requiring attention. Though primarily trained for psychiatric support, many service dogs developed ancillary awareness of medical or physiological changes beyond their specific training focus. "Ma'am," Mac called, his voice carrying the clear authority developed during military command. "My dog is alerting to something about your condition. Are you feeling all right?" Victoria turned back with visible irritation, interpreting his comment as continuation of their conflict rather than genuine concern. "I'm perfectly fine, thank you. I don't need medical assessment from a..." She stopped mid-sentence, pressing one hand against the wall as a wave of dizziness suddenly overtook her. The color drained visibly from her face, perspiration appearing at her temples despite the lounge's careful climate control. These symptoms emerging with alarming suddenness confirmed what Valor had somehow detected moments before any human could have noticed. "You need to sit down immediately," Max said, moving toward her with the decisive efficiency of someone trained in emergency response. As Victoria attempted to dismiss his concern with a dismissive gesture, her knees buckled unexpectedly. Mac caught her arm, preventing her from collapsing entirely as he guided her to the nearest chair. "I'm fine," she insisted weakly, though her physical symptoms clearly contradicted her assertion. Just a momentary, whatever explanation she intended was interrupted by a grimace of pain as she pressed her hand against her chest. The revelation crystallized with alarming clarity. Victoria was experiencing cardiac distress, potentially the beginning stages of a heart attack that Valor had somehow detected through scent changes or other physiological markers before visible symptoms manifested. The service dog, whose legitimacy she had questioned minutes earlier, had potentially identified a life-threatening medical emergency that might otherwise have progressed unrecognized until far more dangerous symptoms appeared. "We need medical assistance immediately," Mac called to the lounge staff, his military training activating as he efficiently assessed Victoria's deteriorating condition, and bring the AED from the emergency station. As lounge personnel rushed to respond, and Victoria struggled to maintain her composure despite escalating symptoms, both she and Mac recognized the profound irony of their situation. The service dog she had viewed as unnecessary accommodation had potentially saved her life through alert capabilities that transcended conventional understanding, a revelation that would fundamentally transform their relationship in the critical minutes and hours to follow. What had begun as conflict over accommodation legitimacy had suddenly evolved into life-threatening medical emergency, where those very accommodation tools might prove the difference between tragedy and survival. The revelation of Victoria's vulnerability and Valor's unexpected medical alerting created an immediate reframing of their relationship from adversarial to interdependent that neither could have anticipated during their initial confrontation. As the lounge erupted into controlled chaos around them, Mac faced an immediate decision with potentially life-altering consequences. He could step back and allow the arriving medical response team to handle Victoria's emergency, maintaining professional distance from someone who had questioned his disability accommodation. Alternatively, he could actively engage his emergency medical training from the military, potentially providing critical intervention during the precious minutes before professional help arrived. The decision crystallized instantly professional distance and justified resentment, yielding to the fundamental commitment to human welfare that had defined his military service. "I have combat medical training," Mac informed the lounge staff as they arrived with the emergency medical kit. "Let me help until the paramedics arrive." This choice to assist someone who had minutes earlier challenged his legitimate needs reflected core values that transcended the morning's uncomfortable interaction. Mac's decision prioritized Victoria's immediate medical welfare over any justified feelings of vindication or resentment, demonstrating character that extended beyond the conflict that had initially defined their relationship. As Mac knelt beside Victoria's chair, her condition was deteriorating rapidly. "I think you're having a cardiac event," he explained calmly, his tone shifting from the defensive posture of their earlier interaction to the confident authority of his medical training. "I need to ask you some quick questions and check your vital signs." Victoria, now visibly struggling with pain radiating through her chest and left arm, nodded weakly, her earlier authoritative demeanor completely dissolved by medical reality. The power dynamic between them had inverted with stunning speed. The manager who had questioned accommodation legitimacy, now dependent on the very person whose needs she had minimized. "Sharp or dull pain?" Mac asked, checking her pulse while maintaining reassuring eye contact. "Sharp, like pressure," Victoria managed between labored breaths. "History of heart problems in my family." This vital information guided Mac's assessment as he efficiently collected critical data: heart rate elevated and irregular, skin clammy, blood pressure likely elevated based on visible symptoms. The presentation strongly suggested myocardial infarction rather than simple anxiety or indigestion, confirming the seriousness of the situation. Meanwhile, Valor maintained alert position nearby, his behavior demonstrating the profound difference between service animals and pets, remaining calm and focused despite the emergency activity surrounding them. The dog's alerting had provided crucial early warning that potentially allowed intervention before catastrophic cardiac damage occurred, a capability no human observer could have provided. When the AED arrived, Mac immediately began preparing it for potential use while continuing to monitor Victoria's condition. "This is precautionary," he explained, his calm efficiency providing critical psychological support alongside medical intervention. "The paramedics have been called, and should arrive within minutes. Try to take slow, deep breaths if possible. The consequences of Mac's decision to help began manifesting immediately. Lounge staff who had observed Victoria's earlier skepticism regarding his service dog now witnessed the dramatic reversal of the veteran with PTSD, providing potentially life-saving assistance, while his service animal remained perfectly behaved amid emergency conditions. The contrast between assumption and reality could not have been more stark or educational. More significantly, Mac's decision created unexpected space for Victoria's own reflection despite her medical distress. Between waves of pain and fear, she registered the profound irony of receiving critical assistance from someone whose accommodation needs she had questioned minutes earlier. While her condition prevented verbalization of this recognition, her eyes communicated a complexity of emotion beyond mere physical distress. As airport medical personnel arrived approximately 6 minutes after Victoria's symptoms began, Mac provided a concise, professional briefing on her condition and the interventions already implemented. Suspected myocardial infarction, symptoms began approximately 6 minutes ago with rapid progression. Patient reports family history of heart disease. Vital signs suggest significant cardiac distress, though she's remained conscious throughout. The lead paramedic nodded appreciation for the quality of information. Military medical training, Army Rangers, combat medic certification. Mac confirmed briefly before stepping back to give the professionals appropriate space. This secondary recognition that Mac's military background included medical training beyond what most civilians would possess added another dimension to the consequences of his decision to help. Victoria was receiving potentially life-saving early intervention precisely because the veteran whose disability accommodation she had questioned possessed specialized emergency skills developed during the military service that had contributed to his PTSD. As the medical team stabilized Victoria and prepared her for immediate transport to the nearest hospital, the most significant consequence of Mac's decision emerged in an unexpected moment of connection. Despite her pain and the oxygen mask now covering her face, Victoria reached out, grasping Mac's hand with surprising strength. "Thank you," she managed, the simple acknowledgement conveying recognition far beyond the immediate medical assistance. "You're going to be okay," Mac assured her, accepting the gesture without reservation or resentment. "They'll take good care of you." This brief exchange, genuine gratitude, met with simple compassion, represented remarkable evolution from their confrontational positioning just 15 minutes earlier. Mac's decision to help had created space for connection that transcended their initial conflict, demonstrating how crisis often strips away social pretense to reveal more authentic human interaction. As Victoria was wheeled toward the waiting ambulance, Mac found himself experiencing unexpected emotion, not satisfaction at cosmic justice or vindication of his service dog's legitimacy, but genuine concern for someone whose vulnerability had been suddenly and dramatically revealed. The consequences of his decision included not just potentially saving her life, but also experiencing his own capacity for compassion beyond justified resentment. The final consequence manifested as Mac returned to the quiet area to collect his belongings, Valor maintaining perfect service position despite the disruption to their morning routine. Sarah, the receptionist who had witnessed the entire sequence of events, approached with visible emotion. "What your dog did detecting her condition before anyone could see it, that was remarkable," she said, her professional demeanor momentarily set aside. "In your response, after how she questioned you." She didn't complete the thought, but her expression conveyed clear recognition of the character his actions had demonstrated. Valor was doing what he's trained for, detecting physiological changes that humans can't perceive, Mac explained simply. And medical response is what I was trained for. This humble framing, attributing their life-saving intervention to training rather than extraordinary character, reflected Mac's fundamental values, while understating the significance of his decision. In choosing to help someone who had questioned his legitimate needs, he had demonstrated principles that transcended the morning's conflict and potentially altered not just Victoria's medical outcome, but her understanding of service animals and invisible disabilities. As Mac gathered his presentation materials, still intending to make his flight despite the morning's dramatic disruption, he recognized that this seemingly chance encounter had created ripples that would likely extend far beyond this day. For everyone involved, consequences that neither he nor Victoria could have anticipated during their initial confrontation over Valor's presence in the executive lounge. While the primary narrative focused on Mac, Victoria, and their evolving interaction, a secondary plot began developing among the lounge staff and guests who had witnessed the dramatic events. In the staff break room, receptionist Sarah engaged in animated conversation with colleagues who had missed the morning's excitement. "You should have seen it," she recounted, still processing her own amazement. The dog alerted to her condition before she showed any symptoms anyone could see. The manager who was questioning whether he even belonged in the lounge. This retelling focused on the service dog's remarkable medical alerting rather than the interpersonal conflict initiated a ripple effect of secondary narrative development. Staff members who had previously received only general guidance about service animal accommodation began asking specific questions about different types of working dogs and their capabilities. "I thought service dogs were just for blind people or people in wheelchairs," admitted Carlos, a newer lounge attendant. "I didn't know they could detect medical conditions or help with invisible disabilities." "That's exactly the problem," Sarah responded, her perspective clearly influenced by the morning's events. "People question accommodations they don't understand." That veteran had to justify his legitimate need while appearing perfectly healthy, then ended up potentially saving her life minutes later. This conversation, educational rather than merely dramatic, represented an important secondary development emerging from the primary incident. The staff's evolving understanding about service animals and invisible disabilities would potentially affect countless future guest interactions, creating systemic improvement beyond the individual encounter between Mac and Victoria. Meanwhile, in the main lounge, a parallel secondary narrative unfolded among guests who had witnessed the emergency. The distinguished older gentleman who had intervened earlier found himself center of attention at a small gathering of curious Platinum members. "I served on the board of a veterans organization for years," he explained, providing context for his earlier support of Mac. "These service dogs undergo thousands of hours of specialized training. They're legitimate medical equipment, not pets or emotional support animals." The difference seemed pretty clear when that dog, alerted to her heart condition, observed a business traveler who had watched the emergency unfold. "I had no idea they could detect medical issues that specific. Most people don't," the older gentleman acknowledged. "That's why handlers face so much resistance. Visible disabilities get recognized, but invisible ones get questioned despite being equally legitimate." This educational conversation among influential travelers represented another significant secondary development, the potential for attitude shifts among precisely the premium clientele that had concerned Victoria during her initial confrontation with Mac. The witnessed demonstration of Valor's legitimate medical function had created organic learning opportunity that formal sensitivity training could rarely achieve. A third secondary plot strand developed in the airport administration offices, where Victoria's supervisor, Regional Director Eleanor Palmer, received notification of the medical emergency. The incident report included specific mention of the service dog's alert and the veteran's medical assistants, creating immediate questions about the circumstances preceding the emergency. Was there any issue with the service animal before the medical incident? Palmer asked the lounge assistant manager who had delivered the report. Ms. Hargrove was discussing accommodation options with the handler. The assistant replied carefully, professional loyalty competing with factual accuracy. She was exploring alternative seating arrangements for his service dog. Palmer's expression reflected immediate understanding of the likely actual interaction. After 30 years in luxury hospitality management, she recognized the euphemistic language that often disguised problematic guest interactions. Was she questioning the legitimacy of a service animal that subsequently demonstrated legitimate medical alerting capability? Palmer asked directly, her tone suggesting this clarification carried administrative significance. There appeared to be some concern about the animal's presence in the main lounge area. The assistant acknowledged reluctantly. The handler was asserting his accommodation rights when his dog alerted to her condition. This administrative awareness that Victoria had potentially created liability issues by questioning legitimate disability accommodation immediately before experiencing medical emergency added significant institutional dimension to the secondary narrative. The incident would likely prompt formal review of accommodation protocols and staff training, extending the impact of the morning's events far beyond the individuals directly involved. These interconnected secondary plot developments, staff education, guest awareness, and administrative response ensured that the consequences of Mac and Victoria's encounter would ripple outward to affect broader institutional practices and cultural understanding regarding service animals and invisible disabilities. The individual medical emergency was creating potential for systemic improvement in accommodation approaches that might benefit countless future travelers navigating similar challenges. This web of secondary narratives transformed what might have remained isolated interpersonal conflict in a catalyst for institutional evolution, connecting the morning's dramatic events to larger questions about disability recognition, accommodation practices, and the often invisible nature of conditions requiring specialized support. These developing threads would continue expanding alongside the primary narrative, creating context for the eventual resolution between Mac and Victoria while extending potential impact far beyond their individual interaction. 3 days after the dramatic events in the Platinum Lounge, Mac sat in a hospital waiting room, a modest floral arrangement beside him and Valor in perfect service position at his feet. Despite having successfully completed his Washington presentation and returned to Dallas as scheduled, he found himself drawn to check on Victoria's condition, a decision that surprised him given their uncomfortable initial interaction. The impulse to visit hadn't emerged from obligation or social expectation, but from genuine concern combined with awareness of how profoundly vulnerable serious medical events could leave someone. His own experience with physical and psychological recovery had cultivated empathy that transcended their brief adversarial positioning. When a nurse finally directed him to Victoria's room, Mac found her propped up in bed, looking simultaneously smaller and more vulnerable than the authoritative manager he had encountered days earlier. The hospital setting had stripped away the professional armor of tailored suits and managerial confidence, revealing the ordinary human beneath the executive persona. Major McAllister, Victoria acknowledged, surprise evident in her expression. "I didn't expect to see you again. I wanted to check how you're recovering," Mac replied simply, remaining near the doorway to avoid any impression of intrusion. And Valor was concerned as well. The inclusion of the dog in his explanation, personifying the animal's alerting as concern, created unexpected opening for more meaningful conversation. Victoria's gaze shifted to the German Shepherd, his calm, attentive presence contrasting sharply with common misconceptions about animals in medical facilities. "The doctor said I had what they call a widowmaker heart attack," she said after a moment's hesitation. "If it had happened when I was alone rather than in public with immediate assistance, the outcome would likely have been very different." This acknowledgement that the emergency response potentially enabled by Valor's alert and Mac's intervention had likely saved her life marked significant evolution from their initial interaction. The manager who had questioned accommodation legitimacy was directly recognizing the value of the very service animal capability she had previously minimized. Valor alerted to changes in your body chemistry before visible symptoms appeared, Mac explained, moving slightly further into the room as the conversation opened. "It's not what he's primarily trained for, but many service dogs develop sensitivity to physiological changes beyond their specific training focus." "What is he primarily trained for, if you don't mind my asking?" Victoria inquired, her tone reflecting genuine curiosity rather than the skeptical assessment that had characterized her earlier questioning. The question created opportunity for authentic education rather than defensive justification. Mac considered briefly before responding with straightforward honesty rather than minimal disclosure. "Valor helps me manage combat-related PTSD," he explained. "He's trained to detect rising anxiety through physiological changes, create buffer space in crowded environments, perform deep pressure therapy during stress responses, and interrupt panic episodes before they escalate. He makes it possible for me to function in civilian environments that would otherwise trigger debilitating symptoms." This comprehensive explanation, offered voluntarily rather than in defensive response to challenged accommodation, created foundation for genuine understanding rather than mere compliance with disability regulations. Mac was sharing insight into invisible disability reality rather than simply asserting legal rights, allowing Victoria to recognize the legitimate complexity behind what might externally appear as simply bringing a dog into premium spaces. "I had no idea service animals performed such specific medical functions," Victoria admitted, her honesty matching his own. "My understanding was limited. Most people's is," Mac acknowledged without accusation. "Visible disabilities are more readily understood. Invisible ones require explanation that feels invasive to provide, but necessary to justify legitimate needs." This framing, identifying the systematic challenge rather than personal failure, offered Victoria a path toward understanding without shame-based defensiveness. The development of their relationship had moved from confrontation to education, from challenge to recognition, creating space for genuine connection beyond their initial positioning. As their conversation continued, it evolved beyond disability accommodation to include Mac's engineering work, Victoria's hospitality career path, and eventually their shared appreciation for international travel destinations. These broader connections, discovering mutual interests and experiences beyond the circumstances of their first meeting, transformed their interaction from incident-focused to genuinely interpersonal. "The medical director mentioned they'll be releasing me tomorrow," Victoria noted as their conversation reached natural conclusion. "I'll be on restricted activity for several weeks, but the prognosis is good with medication and lifestyle adjustments." "That's excellent news," Mac responded with genuine pleasure at her positive prognosis. A moment of silence followed, not awkward but thoughtful, before Victoria addressed the underlying reality they had both been navigating around. "I owe you an apology," she said directly. "My approach to your service dog accommodation was inappropriately skeptical. I prioritized abstract concerns about guest perception over legitimate disability needs." This acknowledgement, specific rather than general, Addressing actual behavior rather than vague regret demonstrated significant relationship development. Victoria wasn't merely expressing gratitude for medical assistance, but recognizing the problematic nature of her initial accommodation approach. "I appreciate that," Mac replied, accepting the apology without minimizing its significance. Service animal handlers face those challenges daily, having legitimate medical equipment questioned or challenged based on assumptions about what disability should look like. This response, educational rather than accusatory, continued their evolution from adversaries to potential allies in improving understanding. Mac wasn't demanding performative contrition, but offering framework for genuine perspective shift that might affect future accommodation approaches. As Mac prepared to leave, promising to check in after Victoria's discharge, both recognized how profoundly their relationship had transformed from its inauspicious beginning. What had begun with conflict over accommodation legitimacy had evolved through life-threatening crisis into genuine connection based on mutual recognition and respect. This development hadn't erased their different perspectives or experiences, but had created space for understanding that transcended initial assumptions. Their relationship had developed not through dramatic declarations or extraordinary compatibility, but through the gradual accumulation of authentic exchanges following unexpected crisis, each interaction building foundation for connection neither could have anticipated during their initial confrontation in the Platinum Lounge 3 days earlier. 2 weeks after Victoria's hospital discharge, Mac arrived at DFW Airport for another business flight to Washington. As he approached the Platinum Lounge entrance with Valor at heel, he experienced the familiar combination of anticipation and concern that accompanied any return to sites of previous access challenges. Though their hospital conversation had suggested genuine evolution in Victoria's understanding, organizational policies and cultures often proved resistant to individual perspective shifts. Sarah greeted him at the reception desk with professional warmth. "Welcome back, Major McAllister. Your usual quiet area is available if you prefer." Mac thanked her and moved into the lounge, noting subtle but significant changes since his previous visit. A discreet sign near the entrance now included specific mention of service animals in its accessibility information. The arrangement of the quiet area had been modified to provide slightly more space and privacy while remaining integrated with the main lounge rather than segregated. These modifications, minor but meaningful, suggested systemic response beyond individual enlightenment. As Max settled into the quiet area to review materials for his Pentagon meeting, the climactic event began unfolding. Victoria entered the lounge, her professional appearance restored, though careful observers might notice slightly less rigid posture and more subdued color palette than her previous tailored perfection. She noticed Mac immediately and approached his seating area with purposeful direction. "Major McAllister," she greeted him, her tone warmer than their initial interaction, though still maintaining professional boundaries. "I hope I might find you here today. Your administrative assistant mentioned your travel schedule when I called to follow up." Mac gestured to the adjacent chair, inviting her to join him while Valor adjusted position to accommodate the newcomer without disrupting his service placement. "How has your recovery been progressing?" he inquired, genuine concern evident beneath the social pleasantry. "Physically on track," Victoria replied with the direct honesty their evolved relationship had established. "Emotionally more complicated. Near-death experiences apparently trigger significant reflection." Before Mac could respond to this unexpected candor, Victoria turned slightly to address the lounge at large, raising her voice to professional projection without disrupting the premium atmosphere. "May I have everyone's attention briefly?" she requested, the familiar authority returning to her tone though modulated differently than before. The lounge quieted as guests looked up with mild curiosity. Victoria stood, unconsciously straightening her jacket in a gesture Mac recognized from their first encounter. "I want to introduce an important initiative," she began, her voice steady despite the vulnerability inherent in public address after recent medical crisis. "Today, we're implementing enhanced accessibility protocols throughout our premium lounges, with this location serving as our pilot program." Mac watched with growing amazement as Victoria outlined comprehensive accommodation improvement staff, training regarding service animal policies, modified spatial design to better accommodate diverse needs without segregation, and revised customer service approaches emphasizing inclusion rather than mere compliance. This initiative emerges from personal experience, Victoria continued, her professionalism momentarily yielding to authentic emotion. 2 weeks ago, this service dog, she gestured toward Valor, who maintained perfect composure despite becoming the center of attention, alerted to my heart attack before any human could detect symptoms. The dog I had questioned as potentially disruptive potentially saved my life through capabilities I had failed to understand or respect. The public acknowledgement, specific, direct, and voluntarily vulnerable, created powerful impact throughout the lounge. Staff members and premium travelers alike focused on Victoria's words with heightened attention. The combination of her executive authority and personal experience creating compelling educational moment. Major McAllister and his service dog Valor have graciously agreed to assist with our staff training program, Victoria concluded, regaining full professional composure. To help our team better understand the legitimate functions of service animals and the appropriate accommodation of invisible disabilities that affect many of our valued guests. This announcement that Mac had agreed to participate in formal training development was news to him, creating a moment of genuine surprise. Victoria had apparently anticipated his cooperation without presuming to finalize arrangements before confirming his willingness. The approach demonstrated both executive confidence and newly developed respect for his agency and expertise. As Victoria concluded her announcement and the lounge gradually returned to its normal quiet activity, she rejoined Mac in the seating area, her expression reflecting awareness of her presumption. "I hope I didn't overstep," she said quietly. "The training program is still in development, and your participation would be appropriately compensated as a professional consultant. Your perspectives would be invaluable, but I understand if you'd prefer not to revisit uncomfortable experiences for corporate training purposes." This qualification, acknowledging his right to decline without pressure despite her public announcement, demonstrated significant evolution from their first interaction. Victoria was approaching him as a potential partner with valuable expertise rather than as accommodation to be managed or problem to be solved. "I'd be interested in discussing the possibilities," Mac replied, genuinely intrigued by the potential impact. Educational approaches often prove more effective than regulatory enforcement alone in improving accommodation practices. As they began discussing training concepts and implementation approaches, the climactic nature of this unexpected public moment became increasingly apparent. Victoria hadn't merely adjusted her individual understanding or privately apologized for previous misjudgment. She had publicly committed her professional authority and institutional resources to systematic improvement based on their shared experience. The executive who had questioned service animal legitimacy was now championing comprehensive accommodation initiatives. The manager who had prioritized premium appearance over accessibility needs was now integrating those needs into the very definition of premium service. The transformation wasn't merely personal, but institutional, potentially affecting countless travelers with disabilities who would encounter improved understanding and accommodation as a result. For Mac, this climactic moment carried particular significance beyond professional opportunity. Throughout his recovery journey, he had navigated between two challenging impulses: the desire to educate others about invisible disabilities versus the exhaustion of constantly explaining and justifying legitimate needs. Victoria's initiative potentially addressed this tension by creating systematic education that might reduce the burden of individual explanation for future travelers with service animals or invisible disabilities. As their discussion of training possibilities continued, building genuine collaborative energy, both recognized that this climactic moment represented more than professional initiative or personal growth. Their chance encounter, beginning with conflict, evolving through medical crisis, and now culminating in institutional change, had created potential ripple effects extending far beyond their individual experiences to improve accessibility for countless others navigating similar challenges in premium travel environments. The climactic public commitment to accessibility improvement, emerging directly from Victoria's life-changing experience and Mac's willingness to engage beyond justified resentment, demonstrated how transformative such encounters could become when approached with genuine openness to evolution rather than defensive entrenchment in initial positions. Following Victoria's unexpected public announcement, she and Mac retreated to the lounge's private conference room to discuss the training initiative in greater detail without disrupting other guests. This transition from public declaration to private planning created space for more substantive resolution of their initial conflict, moving beyond polite reconciliation to genuine collaborative understanding. I want to address our first interaction more directly. Victoria began once they were seated, Valor settling comfortably beside Mac's chair. My approach to your service dog accommodation wasn't just professionally inappropriate, but reflected problematic assumptions about disability and legitimacy that I hadn't previously examined. This specific acknowledgement, naming the actual issue rather than offering vague apology, created foundation for meaningful resolution rather than merely smoothing over discomfort. Victoria was addressing the underlying conflict rather than merely its surface manifestation, demonstrating commitment to genuine understanding beyond social nicety. I appreciate that recognition, Mac responded, neither dismissing her acknowledgement nor extending it beyond her actual responsibility. Service animal handlers encounter those assumptions daily: the skepticism about invisible disabilities, the presumption that accommodation requests represent preference rather than necessity, the burden of constantly educating others about legitimate needs. This framing, contextualizing their specific interaction within broader patterns affecting disabled individuals, elevated their resolution attempt beyond personal reconciliation to acknowledge systemic issues. Mac wasn't merely accepting Victoria's apology, but offering framework for understanding how their conflict reflected larger cultural patterns regarding disability perception and accommodation. The medical experience certainly provided dramatic perspective shift. Victoria acknowledged with unexpected vulnerability, suddenly requiring immediate assistance from someone whose needs I had questioned minutes earlier. The irony wasn't subtle. This honest reflection, acknowledging the powerful juxtaposition of questioning accommodation and then requiring emergency intervention, demonstrated authentic integration of the experience rather than mere embarrassment or obligatory gratitude. Victoria was genuinely processing how the encounter had revealed blind spots in her understanding rather than simply moving past an uncomfortable episode. Near-death experiences have a way of clarifying priorities, Mac observed with gentle humor, acknowledging the intensity of her experience without dramatizing it. Though I'd recommend less extreme methods of developing disability awareness for your staff training program. This moment of shared levity, finding appropriate humor in a situation that could have remained weighted with awkward tension, represented significant progress in their relationship development. They had evolved from adversarial positioning to genuine human connection, capable of acknowledging both the seriousness of the medical emergency and the ironic circumstances surrounding it. As their conversation continued, it evolved from abstract accommodation principles to specific implementations that might improve experiences for disabled travelers while maintaining the premium atmosphere Victoria legitimately needed to preserve. Max shared practical insights from his experiences navigating various accommodation approaches, which had genuinely improved accessibility versus those that technically complied with regulations, while still creating segregation or special treatment. The most effective accommodation is often invisible to others, he explained, creating spaces and policies that naturally integrate diverse needs rather than highlighting them as exceptions or special cases. Victoria nodded thoughtfully, connecting this principle to her hospitality expertise. Premium service should anticipate needs before they require explicit request. That applies to accessibility as much as other guest preferences, though I hadn't previously framed it that way. This convergence, recognizing how disability accommodation could align with rather than contradict luxury hospitality principles, created substantive resolution beyond mere apology and forgiveness. They were developing shared understanding that might transform institutional practices rather than simply repairing individual relationship. Would you be willing to review our draft accommodation protocols before they're finalized? Victoria asked, extending professional respect rather than charity or performative inclusion. Your perspective would be invaluable in identifying potential gaps between technical compliance and genuine accessibility. This invitation, treating Mac as valued consultant rather than educational obligation, demonstrated authentic evolution in Victoria's approach to disability expertise. She was recognizing the legitimate professional value of his lived experience rather than merely acknowledging her previous misjudgment. I'd be happy to contribute, Mac agreed, appreciating the genuine collaborative approach. Though I should note that my experience represents just one perspective among many disability experiences. Comprehensive protocols should incorporate diverse input beyond single consultation. This qualification, acknowledging the limits of his individual perspective rather than positioning himself as definitive authority, reflected Mac's authentic commitment to improving systems beyond his personal benefit. He was advocating for broader inclusion rather than merely accepting the consulting opportunity Victoria had offered. As their discussion of potential collaboration continued, both recognized that their conflict resolution had evolved beyond mere reconciliation to genuine partnership focused on systemic improvement. They weren't simply repairing damaged interaction, but building foundation for constructive engagement that might benefit countless others navigating similar accessibility challenges. The attempted resolution succeeded not through polite avoidance or obligatory apology, but through substantive engagement with the issues underlying their initial conflict. Victoria hadn't merely expressed regret for questioning Mac's accommodation, but had committed professional resources and institutional authority to improving accessibility practices based on their shared experience. Mac hadn't simply accepted apology, but had engaged constructively with potential systemic improvements beyond his individual situation. This resolution approach, addressing root causes rather than merely surface tensions, created foundation for ongoing collaboration rather than merely concluding uncomfortable interaction. Neither was suggesting their brief acquaintance had developed in a friendship, but both recognized the potential value in continued professional exchange that leveraged their complementary expertise in hospitality management and accessibility navigation. As their meeting concluded with concrete plans for Mac's consulting input on the training program, Victoria offered one final observation that demonstrated how completely their relationship had evolved from its inauspicious beginning. "Your service dog literally saved my life," she acknowledged. "But your willingness to engage constructively despite how I initially approached your accommodation might save our organization from continuing harmful practices I hadn't previously recognized." Both represent significant contributions I wouldn't have anticipated during our first interaction. This recognition that Mac's technical expertise and lived experience offered legitimate professional value beyond his medical intervention completed their conflict resolution by acknowledging his full humanity rather than merely appreciating Valor's medical alerting. Victoria was engaging with him as valued consultant and potential ally in accessibility improvement rather than merely recipient of belated accommodation or provider of dramatic medical assistance. Systems improve through exactly this kind of direct engagement. Mac responded, acknowledging the significance of their evolved interaction without overinflating its immediate impact. Hospitality and accessibility ultimately share the same fundamental goal: creating environments where diverse needs receive appropriate attention without unnecessary friction or disruption. This shared framework, connecting Victoria's hospitality expertise with Mac's accessibility experience through common fundamental purpose, represented the most complete resolution of their initial conflict. They had discovered genuine common ground beyond polite reconciliation, creating potential for collaborative engagement that honored both their professional domains while improving experiences for future disabled travelers navigating premium spaces. As they parted ways, Mac to prepare for his Washington flight, Victoria to continue her gradual return to full duties following medical leave, both carried forward not merely resolved conflict, but newfound perspective that would potentially inform their respective professional approaches far beyond this specific interaction. 4 months after their transformative encounter, Victoria stood before the quarterly leadership meeting of Global Luxury Airways, presenting results from the accessibility initiative launched following her medical emergency. The conference room at corporate headquarters contained 30 senior executives responsible for premium service delivery across the airline's international network. The pilot program at DFW Platinum Lounge has demonstrated significant success metrics, Victoria explained, her presentation style still polished, but noticeably more relaxed than her pre-heart attack approach. Guest satisfaction scores among travelers with disabilities have increased 42%, while general guest ratings have shown 7% improvement overall. This data, linking accessibility improvements to enhanced experience for all guests, represented the definitive turning point in Victoria's professional journey. The executive who had once viewed accommodation as potential disruption to premium atmosphere now championed accessibility as core element of luxury service delivery, with quantifiable business results supporting this evolved perspective. Our staff report greater confidence in appropriate accommodation practices, Victoria continued, particularly regarding service animals and invisible disabilities. Complaint incidents related to accommodation misunderstandings have decreased 63% since implementation. These metrics focused on business performance rather than mere compliance reflected how completely Victoria's professional direction had shifted following her medical emergency. She had transformed personal experience into institutional initiative that aligned accessibility with premium service excellence rather than treating them as competing priorities. Meanwhile, across the country at Walter Reed Medical Center, Mac participated in a very different presentation that marked his own turning point and new direction. He stood before a group of recently wounded warriors beginning their recovery journeys. Valor maintaining perfect service position beside him despite the emotionally charged environment. Service animals represent one potential resource among many. Mac explained to the gathered veterans and medical staff. They're not appropriate for everyone's needs, but for some, they provide unique support that medication and traditional therapy alone cannot offer. This balanced presentation, neither overselling service animals as a universal solution nor minimizing their potential benefits, reflected Mac's evolved approach to disability advocacy. Rather than focusing solely on asserting accommodation rights when challenged, he had expanded his engagement to include proactive education that might prevent such challenges while helping others access resources that had proven valuable in his own recovery. Valor alerts to my physiological stress responses before I consciously recognize them. Mac continued, demonstrating several service tasks while explaining their specific medical functions. This early intervention helps prevent escalation to full panic episodes and reduces the overall strain of navigating potentially triggering environments. The practical demonstration showing concrete tasks rather than abstract benefits embodied Mac's new direction in disability education. He had developed structured presentation approaches that communicated essential information without requiring personal disclosure beyond his comfort level, balancing advocacy with appropriate boundaries. This evolution from reactive defense of accommodation rights to proactive education about service animal capabilities represented significant personal growth catalyzed by the airport lounge encounter. Mac had discovered effective middle ground between exhausting individual explanation and accepting persistent misunderstanding, developing educational frameworks that might improve system-wide recognition while preserving his energy for personal and professional priorities. As Victoria and Mac pursued these parallel new directions, she integrating accessibility into luxury service excellence, he expanding targeted education about service animal capabilities, both carried forward the transformative impact of their chance encounter. What had begun with conflict over accommodation legitimacy had evolved through life-threatening medical emergency into institutional improvements and personal growth that extended far beyond their individual interaction. The turning points they navigated weren't dramatic personality transformations, but significant evolutions in how they applied existing capabilities and values. Victoria's hospitality expertise now incorporated accessibility as essential service element rather than regulatory obligation. Mac's advocacy expanded from individual accommodation to systematic education without sacrificing personal boundaries. These complementary directions represented authentic growth that honored their fundamental characters while expanding their impact in ways neither could have anticipated during their initial confrontation in the Platinum Lounge. 1 year after the heart attack that had transformed her understanding of disability accommodation, Victoria sat at her desk reviewing the latest quarterly reports on a now fully implemented accessibility initiative. The program had expanded from its DFW pilot to all 14 premium lounges in Global Luxury Airways International Network, with implementation plans underway for the remaining domestic locations. The success metrics remained impressive: improved satisfaction scores, reduced complaints, enhanced staff confidence in appropriate accommodation practices. Yet Victoria found her attention drawn not to the business performance indicators, but to a handwritten note recently received from a Platinum member with Parkinson's disease, thanking her for creating an environment where his medical needs received appropriate attention without drawing unwanted focus or requiring repeated explanation. This personal impact beyond statistics or corporate recognition reflected Victoria's most significant character growth over the past year. The executive who had once viewed success primarily through metrics and reputation now found deeper satisfaction in how policies affected individual human experiences, particularly for those navigating challenges she had previously overlooked or minimized. Her near-death experience and unexpected rescue by someone whose accommodation needs she had questioned had catalyzed genuine evolution in her understanding of both disability and hospitality. Victoria had come to recognize that true premium service meant anticipating diverse needs without requiring justification or creating segregation principles that aligned with luxury hospitality, while transcending traditional definitions focused primarily on visible indicators of exclusivity and status. This growth wasn't merely professional, but profoundly personal. Victoria's own medical journey had created newfound empathy for those managing health conditions while maintaining professional responsibilities. The cardiac rehabilitation, medication adjustments, and lifestyle modifications she now navigated had given her direct experience with the often invisible nature of physical vulnerability that many travelers managed without apparent external indication. As she completed her review of the accessibility reports, Victoria reflected on how completely her perspective had evolved from that morning in the Platinum Lounge. The woman who had questioned a service dog's legitimate presence now championed comprehensive accommodation as an essential element of premium hospitality. The manager who had prioritized appearance over accessibility now found greater professional satisfaction in creating environments where diverse needs received appropriate attention without unnecessary barriers or attention. Meanwhile, across the city, Mac conducted his regular training session with Valor in a public park, maintaining the service dog's essential skills while navigating the ordinary challenges of urban environments. As Valor performed a precisely executed block maneuver that created buffer space between Mac and an approaching jogger, Mac found himself reflecting on his own character growth over the past year. The consulting role with Global Luxury Airways had evolved from initial training development to ongoing advisory position that provided both professional satisfaction and supplemental income supporting his engineering work. More significantly, this corporate engagement had helped Mac discover effective balance between necessary self-advocacy and broader educational impact, developing approaches that improve systemic understanding without requiring exhausting personal disclosure or constant justification of legitimate needs. This evolution represented significant character growth for someone whose post-military recovery had often oscillated between defensive assertion of accommodation rights and complete avoidance of potentially challenging environments. Mac had discovered sustainable middle ground environments where his expertise was genuinely valued, accommodation needs respectfully recognized, and professional contributions appreciated beyond his identity as disabled veteran. The man who had once approached premium spaces with mixture of entitled determination and wary anticipation of potential challenges now navigated those environments with greater confidence in both institutional understanding and his own capacity to address misconceptions effectively when necessary. His advocacy had evolved from primarily personal defense to balanced approach, incorporating both individual boundary maintenance and systemic education that might benefit others navigating similar challenges. As Mac completed Valor's training session and prepared for an upcoming consulting visit to Global Luxury Airways Chicago Lounge, he reflected on the unexpected relationship that had catalyzed this growth. Neither he nor Victoria had sought dramatic connection or profound transformation from their airport encounter. Yet their willingness to engage beyond initial conflict and subsequent crisis had created space for mutual growth that honored their fundamental characters while expanding their perspectives and capabilities. Mac's military training had taught him that chaos often revealed character rather than creating it, that crisis typically amplified existing tendencies rather than transforming them completely. His experience with Victoria confirmed this principle. The heart attack hadn't fundamentally altered her professional competence or attention to detail, but had expanded those qualities to incorporate considerations previously outside her awareness or priority. Similarly, Mac's core discipline and technical precision remained consistent, but now found expression in educational frameworks that might improve accessibility for others rather than focusing solely on his individual accommodation. Their parallel character growth reflected complementary but distinct journeys catalyzed by shared experience, each integrating the dramatic airport encounter into ongoing personal and professional development in ways that honored their fundamental natures while expanding their understanding and impact. This authentic evolution, neither forced transformation nor superficial adaptation, demonstrated how unexpected connections could create lasting growth when approached with genuine openness rather than defensive entrenchment or performative change.